the one issue that I think that we have agreed on, and I appreciate Senator Bowen and what he's been involved with this also, is the fact that we have given some direction to trying to turn back the problem we have with methamphetamine here in Commonwealth. We have come with a compromise on a bill that was an issue that would not totally require someone who has short periods of time that they need pseudoephedrine for their a decongestant. And so we have changed that to allow an individual to have as much as 7.2 grams, I believe it is, a month, as much as 24 grams in a year, which is a whole lot of Sudafed or pseudoephedrine. And so no requirement of a prescription at this point. I don't know what the House will do with that bill, but I think it's a great compromise that both sides agree. And I don't necessarily know that it's a Democratic-Republican issue. I think it's more of a geographic issue, particularly for those of us who live on the border with Indiana. Indiana does not restrict the sale of that product, and if we restricted that sale here in Kentucky, you know, someone could be over in southern Indiana, buy the product, transport it back, and there could be some issue with regards to breaking the law with Sudafed. And so we've come to a great compromise, and I think it's an important one. And Senator Jerry Rhodes of Madisonville was a key player in that compromise, and I just think that we're moving in the correct direction with that. There's lots of other things that have occurred, and I want to obviously give time to those others, and I just appreciate the opportunity again to serve here in West Kentucky and not in downtown Lexington. Thank you so much.
One of the big issues that we're dealing with, and I'll take just a minute to address this, and that's the Medicaid Managed Care program that's currently in place. It was rolled out this past fall. We have some real issues with that. It affects a lot of people, it affects a lot of patients, and it affects a lot of providers. So it's something that we're struggling with currently. You know, it's not going to be an easy resolution to the problems that we face. And I mentioned this earlier today, the MCOs, the Medicaid Managed Care organizations, have received about $708 million, and at this point in time, they've only paid providers $420. So you can see that we have a little bit of problem with providers getting paid. And in a lot of cases, we have a problem with patients getting prior authorization. We need for these MCOs to act more like insurance companies. The guidelines and policies that they're operating under right now probably are not as good as they can be or should be. And it's hard for us, you know, as a General Assembly to deal with this issue because we can't really deal with it in a comprehensive manner. It was an administrative decision, and now the best that we can probably do is to throw lifelines out to different entities, pharmacies, and this type of thing. And pharmacies, by the way, are one of the ones that are suffering the most because a lot of their reimbursements are less than their costs. So you can see that the great concern that the pharmacies have with this Medicaid Managed Care program that's going on. So it's a great challenge for us, and I've been privy to a lot of the testimony and conversations that have gone on because I'm on the Health and Welfare Committee, and the chairman of that committee made the statement the other day, said every day she wakes up and she feels like it's Groundhog Day because every day she's faced with these Medicaid Managed Care problems. And so she, for one, has worked very diligently on it and has given us the opportunity to hear hours and hours and hours of testimony on this topic. So it's a big issue, it's a big deal. If if it doesn't touch your life, you're very fortunate, but it does touch on a lot of lives across the state of Kentucky because we had something like 480,000 people that are on Medicaid. So it's a huge expense to the state of Kentucky. The problems are huge, they're complicated, they're complex, and it's something that we're struggling with at the state level.
Certainly our job and our biggest priority right now in the House is to pass a budget. As you all know, the governor presented a budget to us back in January that was very austere, certainly lives within the resources that we have, reduces our structural deficit from about 4.6% of the budget down to 1.9% of the budget, has the lowest amount of capital projects and bonding since 1996. So I think it's a very disciplined budget. Obviously wish that we had more revenues, but you'll be glad to know that there are no new revenue sources, particularly from taxes. But we've had all of our 6 budget review subcommittees working diligently for the last 2 or 3 weeks on the budget, hearing testimony, discussing, trying to find ways to see if there is any money that can be shifted around for the priorities. A lot of the agencies are going to be cut 8.4%. As I had mentioned earlier today to a group we talked to, a lot of these have already taken 20 and 30% cuts in the aggregate over the last 4 years. So there certainly has been some pain in those agencies. Higher education is taking a 6.4% cut, and we're trying to hold the budgets for our key priorities in the state of Kentucky, which I hope you all would agree with, such as K through 12 education, primary, secondary education, human services, particularly Medicaid, and then our public protection programs, probation and parole and the like, our state police. Keep those flatlined at about the level that we're currently funding in this current biennium that's going to be ending at the end of June. One thing that we are going to be able to do, I think, on our side, Tom, is that through the help and work of our good subcommittee chairman, Jimmy Lee, we're going to be able to shift a little money around and put some more money into Meals on Wheels, which we desperately need to do in Kentucky. We've got 9,000 people on the waiting list for Meals on Wheels in Kentucky. I think we're going to be able to put hopefully about $1.5 million more into that program, a little bit more into the guardianship program and in-home care to address those needs there. But bottom line on the budget, there's not a lot we can do. We're going to hold pretty much to the reductions that the governor has suggested. We're going to probably redirect some of the spending priorities, a few of which I just mentioned, but otherwise it's going to be pretty close to what the governor's recommendation was. Our revenues are increasing in Kentucky. I think next year, fiscal year 13, will be a lot better than this present year that we're in, but we've got to be prudent and be responsible of your tax dollars that are sent up there, and certainly try to do the best to continue moving Kentucky forward, but in a responsible way.
One of the things that we've been working on is worrying about the jobs in our area. We have some real problems with a couple of our large smelters that employ a lot of people. Their energy costs, just as you and I, when we fill up our gas tanks, have noticed that our energy costs are going up. Well, our smelters are feeling the pressure of energy prices as well as the lower price of aluminum. So, you know, this puts a lot of our jobs in jeopardy, and this should worry all of our judge executives, should worry all of our leaders in our communities, because if we was to lose 5,000 or 6,000 jobs in this area, it would be devastating to all the economy of our area. And so probably if there's one problem that worries me most of all, this probably is the one problem that is of true concern to me. Don't have an answer for it, but we must continue to work on and try to find answers for this problem. So this week I did submit a proposal for some of the coal servants money that we have in our county, and one of the things that I submitted was for us to increase the amount of money that we give to our community colleges. We have in Henderson a program called Colonels to College, which we're going to try to help any of our children in the community that graduate from high school that have I think a 2.75 average, that have a good attendance record. I think it's 94%. Hopefully we'll be able to see our kids go to college, and we will be able to help them financially.
I passed a bill this week. It was a jobs sharing and work sharing bill. It's an economic development revenue bill for the state of Kentucky. There are 20 states that are already doing this. And I asked that one of the cabinets study it to see if we can get job sharing. Because what's going to happen with this budget's going to be some severe cuts. And I personally don't like laying people off, personally. If we can find some way of sharing jobs, it will actually increase the amount of revenue going into the state coffers and allow families to stay a little more stable and offer economic development, a little bit of expansion in our society. What else I can tell you? I've been asking for the last couple of years that we increase the funding for KET. KET is the only statewide media source in this state. Louisville Courier-Journal only does Western Kentucky. Lexington Herald only does Eastern Kentucky. There is no statewide media source other than KET. And they have taken a pretty severe beating as far as the budget is concerned. And we need access to information. So we should do that.
There's been a lot of talk today about drug abuse. I think it's one thing the legislature can agree on is that we do have a drug problem in Kentucky. The peel mills were mentioned, and that's something we are working on. I had a bill that passed this week that does address some of that. As you may know, in 2007, we passed a mine safety bill that dealt with alcohol and drug abuse, and because it was something that was really needed, because mining is a dangerous occupation, and people who work in the mines deserve to know that their co-workers aren't impaired by drugs, thereby endangering their lives. And so we passed that law, and one of the things we found out from that law was that probably 70% of the people in Kentucky who are failing drug tests are having prescription drugs in their system. And some of those probably, maybe they've gotten addicted to pain pills or whatever, but that's something we are working on. But we also changed the law a little bit because there were some instances where we've heard of K2, another thing that we're trying to ban. There were some people whose actually K2 showed up in their system. And so we're finding out that people who are going to abuse drugs, they don't want to lose their job. So if they think there's something that's not being tested for, or if there's something that may not show up, then they may go to that particular drug or whatever. And so what we're doing is we're allowing the Mine Safety Board, then under the new law that I passed, to be able to change the test to make sure that we're testing for some other things so that as new things come on, people aren't going to be able to abuse those and make those changes. So that's something that we're doing. We're also going to make it where the people who do fail the test are going to have to seek, and all the coal companies themselves are providing programs for people who are abusive with drugs. And so we're making sure that they're going to go to those programs and try to get intervention, or they'll lose their license to operate for a little bit longer. So that's some things that's happening on the drug front. There were a couple other bills that we had in my committee, the Natural Resource Environment Committee this week. We passed a bill out of committee that would do a better job of trying to get banks to lend money for brownfields, so that brownfields. Now, a brownfield site, there's thousands of them in the state. There are old sites where you may have had industrial manufacturing or whatever on them. It could be service stations where there's tanks there at the ground or whatever. There's contamination there, and they're not being reused. And so we have a lot of sites out there, and what happens is that businesses may locate, they may build a parking lot, and they'll go out and find a greenfield site somewhere and not reuse these brownfield sites. And part of the reason they do that is because they don't want the liability. I think you've all seen where maybe a service station would go out of business and the bank had a mortgage on it, but they didn't want to foreclose because they didn't want to own that site and have the liability problems and the environmental problems associated with that. So we're trying to reuse these sites and to establish some liability requirements so that if someone new comes on there and they do some things to clean it up, we don't come back later and say, well, you've got to do a lot more than what we told you initially that you had to do. So that's very important, I think, to try to use these brownfields up and protect some of the other land that we need to leave as farmland, and so we can feed ourselves and all of that.